Chapter 15. What now? For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. Jeremiah 29:11 and 12. My recovery in the hospital was scheduled to last for 4 or 5 days. Many other people, other than my roommates, blessed me during that time as well. Derek stayed with me almost constantly, and friends and family visited me for support and encouragement. Even with all of this precious time with my loved ones, I was ready to return home as day 5 approached. However, because a tear in my lung was slow to heal, I was still in the hospital 8 days after the surgery. It was explained to us that if the chest tube was removed before the tear had healed, my lung would collapse and require a more invasive surgery than I had previously endured to reattach the chest tube. On that 8th day, the surgeon came in to check on me as he had every day before. We went through our regular routine. I was asked to cough and then reprimanded playfully for my apparent inability to cough heartily. As I continued to try to cough more deeply, more difficult than it sounds when you have no need or desire to cough and just underwent lung surgery, Dr. Flores would watch for air bubbles in the fluid bag attached to my chest tube. I still remained baffled as to the significance of air bubbles in the fluid bag, and it sure seems like an archaic method of ensuring that the tear in my lung had healed. But I trusted Dr. Flores and faithfully followed his directions every day. However, that day, I was particularly disheartened to see the air bubbles rise in the bag. When I expressed my increasing desire to return home, sure that time with my children would be more medicinal than remaining in the hospital, the doctor gave me 2 options. He told me there was a drug that may quicken the healing of the lung, but it caused pain beyond anything I had ever experienced or imagined. The pain team had managed to find a morphine patch that was both strong enough to control the pain caused by the chest tube, yet weak enough to avoid the severe nausea I often felt from such drugs. However, the pain I had experienced only a few days before resounded fresh in my mind. I had absolutely no desire to experience something even more painful. My memories then rushed back 6 years to Luke's birth. I had decided that for my second child's birth, I was going to show how tough I was and refuse pain medication. Big mistake. Though it may have been all right had Luke not been close to 10 pounds and had he not been born turned 90 degrees, something the doctor assured me just did not happen. Not a mistake I planned to make again. I quickly refused this first option and inquired about the second. My only remaining option was to return home with the chest tube. Though I recognized that this large tube protruding from my side and emptying into a bag was not attractive and more than a little creepy, I jumped at the chance to leave the hospital. I was given all the supplies necessary to keep the open wound that the chest tube pushed through clean, which seemed like an excessive number of morphine patches, several months' worth, and I quickly left the hospital. My sister drove me home, and I was blessed upon my release to have no further difficulty with pain or difficulty caring for the chest tube from home. Just 1 week after returning home, we were asked to return to MSKCC for the surgeon to check the progress of the healing lung. As had been practiced frequently in the hospital, I coughed, and amazingly, no bubbles appeared in the bag attached to the chest tube. Praise God, my lung was healed enough for the tube to be removed. The removal was quick and painless, and I felt free after being attached to that bag for more than 2 weeks. Dr. Flores also informed us that I had very nice lungs. An interesting compliment from a man, but one that made me blush nonetheless, and that he felt the surgery had been extremely successful. He admitted he knew very little about this cancer, but he expressed great hope that I would remain healthy enough to enjoy the raising of our children. We were encouraged and greatly blessed by this sincere and talented doctor. I was most thrilled by the timing of the removal of the chest tube because it allowed me to participate in a long-awaited trip with my mother and a few other girlfriends from our church to a Woman of Faith conference a few hours away in Hartford, Connecticut. The next morning, as I prepared to leave for our trip, I felt great, and I reasoned that without the chest tube, I was no longer in need of the morphine patch. I rushed to remove the patch from my shoulder blade, grabbing my things, kissed the children, and jumped in my mom's car. By the time we reached the conference, I felt tired, but I was excited to get to the conference, to which I had long been looking forward. We entered the arena, found our seats, and began to sing praise songs. I remember singing perhaps only one song before sitting down to rest. I remember nothing about the first speaker besides my rapidly increasing fatigue and the uncontrollable tears that began as I considered remaining in the arena for the rest of the day. I was overwhelmed with the effort to keep my eyes open, and I briefly considered laying down on the filthy floor to rest my eyes for just a moment. My mom, as always, was perceptive to my inner struggle and suggested she escort me to the hotel early. I reluctantly agreed, feeling like a big baby. My mom's long history with Hilton, she traveled quite frequently and almost always lodged with Hilton, prompted them to allow me to get into our room early. As my mom checked us in, I sat in the lobby and cried silently. I had never before felt so tired. My mom finally led me to our room where I climbed into my bed and immediately fell asleep. My mom returned to the conference and woke me several hours later to inquire whether I would be able to come down for dinner. I quickly decided I was not up to it. She convinced me to reapply one of the morphine patches, which remained in my bag from the trip home from the hospital. Though the pain was slight, we reasoned that perhaps that was what was draining me of all my strength. The next morning, I awoke early and felt great. I was sure that after my rest the previous day, I would be feeling better, and I was right. We had a great time, and the praise time and speakers were as encouraging and uplifting as always. It was just the spiritual boost I needed after the recent surgery. Once home, I decided there was nothing on our calendar. It was the second week of August, and I might as well begin school. So Monday morning, we began our 5th year of homeschool with Ashley in 3rd grade, Luke in second year of kindergarten, and Rebecca being the first Milligan child to attend preschool at an outside school. A local nature museum, the Museum of the Hudson Highlands, has been a favorite place of our family for many years. Their summer nature camps and Saturday morning nature programs are loved by the children and chock full of education information. I did not realize before that they offer a preschool called the Young Naturalist Program. It is, in fact, another blessing that I did not realize they had a preschool, as Ashley would have quickly been enrolled, and the thought of homeschooling the children would have surely been fleeting. But for Rebecca, this opportunity seemed perfect. Even on the coldest of winter days, she loved the hikes through the forest. She loved the other children, the teachers, and all she was learning about the environment of the Hudson Valley. And I, in the meantime, was getting a handle on teaching 2 students at home. She was only away a few hours on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and she easily fit into our school time on Tuesday and Thursday. However, I found I missed her the morning she was away, and I greatly looked forward to next year when we would all be at the school table every day together. I should also explain that Luke's 2 years in kindergarten were not due to inability. His birthday was right at the school cutoff, and we decided we would prefer him to be the oldest rather than the youngest in his class. However, he was showing signs of readiness to begin school, and he desperately wished to join his sister at the school table. We decided to ease our way through kindergarten, stretching it over 2 years. However, Luke easily completed the math and phonics of his kindergarten curriculum, so we are now easing through the 1st grade curriculum, ready to take extra time when he needs it. As is the case each year, I was excited to begin a new year of school, but it always takes a couple of weeks to get into a comfortable routine. My sister in law always told me her two favorite days of the year were the last day of school and the first day of school. So true. Despite the bumps and clumsiness of getting started, we enjoyed our first day. At least I did. Our second day of school, I felt sure I could remove the pain patch. I was, after all, in the comfort of my own home. I was thrilled to be drug free. However, by midday, I was again feeling overcome with fatigue. Derek and I assumed it might have been a little early after the surgery for me to begin school, and he suggested I take the rest of the week off at least. But I hated to lose our momentum of the first few days, feeling I would surely feel better the next morning. I went to bed that night by 8 o'clock after a long afternoon nap, and I slept well. That following morning, a Wednesday, I awoke with a feeling of despair like nothing I have ever experienced. As soon as I opened my eyes, I began to cry uncontrollably, and I knew instantly that there was no way I was going to make it out of bed. But my extreme anxiety and dread were mysterious, for I felt little pain, only a lingering soreness from the surgery. Derek had left early for work, but my mom was home, and I immediately reached for the phone to call her. I heard the children beginning to stir downstairs, and my anxiety increased significantly as I considered that I might need to go downstairs to begin their day. Thankfully, my mom wasted no time rushing the 500 yards from her house to mine. She rushed up to my room, prayed for me. I loved that, and quickly collected the children, assuring me she would keep them throughout the day and as many days after as I needed. My relief at knowing the children were cared for was immeasurable, but my fear steadily increased as I tried to understand this sudden and overwhelming feeling of defeat and despair. In my mind, I was unable to rationalize that my pain was slight and my hope for the future was great. Yet my heart emphatically exclaimed that I would never again be capable of living the life I had lived just a few hours before. I was unable to fathom ever getting out of bed long enough to care for the children or even to care for myself. Cleaning the house, homeschooling, traveling, or planning a simple dinner party with a few friends overwhelmed me with fear and depression in such a way that I would certainly never again be able to perform these previously simple tasks. Depression. I suddenly realized that I was experiencing some sort of depression. Though I had felt intensely sad after the loss of my father, I now knew with certainty that I had never before experienced depression. But why should I be depressed? I lifted up to God all that I had to be thankful for, and the list was seemingly endless. I had no rational reason for depression. I called Derek at work and he came home quickly. I explained my feelings as best I could, though no words seemed to adequately describe the depth of my despair. As my tears continued to flow steadily, Derek called the doctor, asking for advice. It did not take long for the doctor and Derek to determine that I was suffering withdrawal from the morphine patch. I was shocked that I could be addicted after less than 3 weeks of a low dosage of the medication. The doctor's suggestion was to reapply the patch immediately, which explained my sudden recovery from what I now know was the onset of the depression at the Women of Faith conference. Of course, there was absolutely no way I was going to reapply the patch now that I knew the horrible drug was the reason for my current feelings. The doctors assured us that if the patch dosage was lessened gradually, the effects of the addiction would be minimal. But there was no way I was taking the chance of feeling this way again. I was told it would take about a week to overcome those effects of the drugs, and I was determined to ride it out. It was the longest week of my life. Every morning I would awaken and wish that I had not. Every morning Derek asked how I was feeling, and I would fib that I was feeling a little more positive. Truthfully, I saw little point in continuing a life of lying in bed, praying to fall asleep so the time would pass more quickly. A Coach marathon, a light comedy from the 80s, ran for most of the week, and I watched the continual episodes most of the day for most of the week. Somehow I found relief in becoming absorbed in their lives and consequently avoiding mine. I repeated to myself endlessly that my life was enormously blessed and that within just a few days, the effects of those drugs would leave my system. But even these assurances did not lessen my despair. Even knowing my time in this state was short, I saw little reason to continue my life. My heart continued to tell me that I would never again be useful to those I loved. I would continue only as a burden to them. I have never considered suicide, and even at this low point in my life, I did not. But I could see how someone with little hope of lifting of this dark cloud would consider suicide as a very viable option. I have a new understanding and immense empathy for those who suffer regularly from the debilitating disease of depression. I do not fully understand the lesson God wished for me to gain from this experience, but I do know that during that time, I had nowhere and no one to truly depend on except God. He has certainly continued his efforts to make me see that he is ultimately my greatest support and my most beloved friend. I have since fully recovered from both the morphine dependence and the lung surgery. I returned to MSKCC a month later for tests that showed the surgery to be a success and the remaining tumors to be stable. Hooray! I was only allowed 3 months without having to visit any doctor or nurse for tests, treatments, or examinations. However, this did not keep me away from a special friend. About a month after the surgery, on Labor Day, the children and I trekked to the city to spend the day with our dearest nurse and friend, Tiffany. We were additionally blessed to have her sister, Katie, join us. We began at Katie's apartment, just 1 block from Ground Zero, where they served a yummy lunch and the children watched cartoons while we had a chance to chat. The children were in awe of actually being in a New York City apartment, and the macaroni and cheese to them was as good as filet mignon in the finest New York City steakhouse. We then rode the subway to Central Park, our favorite place, where Tiffany and Katie escorted us to Long Pond to ride the canoes. We rented 2 canoes, one with Tiffany, Ashley, and Luke, and the other with Katie, me, and Rebecca. What fun we had on the crowded pond, steering our canoes through the water traffic, finding turtles, ducks, and birds galore, and staring up at the city skyscrapers as we glided through the beautiful pond surrounded by lush grass, trees, and shrubs. It was a memory neither my children nor I will ever forget. The week after Labor Day, Derek began his MBA part-time at New York University. It was a year before that Derek and I decided the timing was as good as it was ever going to be for him to pursue his second master's degree. It was something we felt God was leading us to do. And though we were unsure how we would work it out with my chemotherapy schedule, we were determined to faithfully move forward. My mom was quick to offer her help with our schedule. The doctor allowed for my chemotherapy days to be changed to Fridays. Derek's classes were to be held on Mondays and Wednesdays. And we were sure that with admittedly great effort, we could accomplish this new task. Miraculously, however, the summer before Derek was to begin his program, my chemotherapy came to an end. And at the writing of this book, I have been off of chemotherapy for almost 9 long, glorious months. What has brought me the greatest joy during this respite is my ability to now support Derek in his efforts to complete his MBA. For more than 2 years, he has sacrificed his own desires and ambitions to care for me and the children. I love that God has granted me this opportunity to offer Derek strength during this trying time for him of balancing a full-time job, part-time school, and a family who is always clamoring for his attention. He remains my strength as I return regularly for tests and medical appointments, or on days where fear for my future creeps in. But there are more days than there have been in a very long time where I am able to offer him strength and support. I think every wife and mother wants to feel needed, and this break from my treatments has offered that to me where it was greatly lacking before. I have returned every 3 months since my surgery for monitoring CT scans, and though the small tumors in my lungs are now growing, they have remained small enough to allow me a continued respite from treatment. While relishing this time of feeling good and spending less time with medical personnel and more time with my family, I have also worked hard to eat well, swim several days a week, and rest as much as 3 young children will allow. I hope to build my strength so that if it is not yet time for God to cure me, I will be prepared to fight through any treatments or surgeries my doctors feel are necessary. I have become strong enough that my mother finally moved back to Lakeland, closing up her house here until she might be needed again. God has given me continued strength and resolve. He has blessed me with great hope for my future, as well as enjoyment of my present.